Hello everyone, and welcome to Biopedia. Altruism, or behaviour which negatively impacts an organism and benefits another organism entirely, has puzzled evolutionary biologists for a long time. One example of such behaviour would be the Belding's ground squirrel, which emits a warning cry when it sees a predator. This cry alerts other ground squirrels and allows them to get away to their burrows, but it leaves the sentry-like squirrel with a higher probability of being detected and devoured. Charles Darwin was himself at first of the opinion that altruism might prove capable of undermining his whole theory of natural selection. However, he eventually found a way to resolve this apparent conflict between natural selection and altruism. The solution he came up with, that families may be considered as one unit under natural selection, was essentially kin selection. Now, kin selection is a controversial topic, and there seems to be a real fault line within biology as to whether or not it exists. Obviously, this would be far too big a topic to cover completely in one episode. So, my plan is to discuss what the essence of the idea of kin selection is. In future episodes, we can then move on to other arguments and evidence either for or against the idea. So, in essence, what kin selection refers to is that genes or genetic elements of a donor organism, which benefit a recipient organism in some way, is selected for. How strong the selection pressure for this element would be is correlated to the coefficient of relatedness between these two organisms. Now, before we go any further, I should clarify what a coefficient of relatedness refers to. This is a way of quantifying how related two individuals are by means of how much DNA they have in common, or what percentage of their genome. For example, you would share 50% of your genes with a sibling, making the relatedness coefficient between you 0.5. A coefficient of 1 would refer to two organisms being identical from a genetic standpoint. This carries on down the family tree. Two first cousins would each have inherited half their DNA from the siblings who shared 50% of their genetic material, giving the cousins a relatedness coefficient of 0.125. Second cousins would have a coefficient of 0.03125, and so on. Anyway, tangent over, back to kin selection. Central to the idea of kin selection is Hamilton's rule, laid out in 1963 by William D. Hamilton, and building on work by Sewell Wright, J.B.S. Haldane, and Ronald Fisher. This rule states that genetically controlled altruistic behaviour will spread and be viable in a population if the cost to the organism is less than the benefit. This may sound straightforward enough, but there is an extra dimension to bring into play in the form of inclusive fitness. Fitness is measured in terms of the total number of offspring surviving to adulthood which an organism has, and is thus an assessment of how relatively successful an organism is in passing on its genes to future generations. Now, direct fitness is down to the reproduction of the donor organism itself. However, indirect fitness has a basis in the indirect benefit gained by the donor organism due to the reproduction of the recipient organism of the altruistic action. After all, related organisms share genes, meaning that some of the donor organism's genes may be passed on. Under certain circumstances, helping relatives other than your direct descendants might therefore actually prove beneficial to how well a donor organism's genes are represented in this generation's progeny. This leads us to the concept of inclusive fitness, which is the extent to which an organism can change the presence of its genes in subsequent generations, both by reproducing itself and acting in ways that help close relatives reproduce. In other words, the sum total of both direct and indirect fitness. In order for any altruistic gene to spread in a population, the recipient organism needs to be carrying this gene. There is a specific probability of this with each relative, which is connected to the coefficient of relatedness discussed above. After all, relatives don't share all their genetic material, but only a fraction of it. This means that both the magnitude of the benefit, B, and the coefficient of relatedness, R, between two organisms must be taken into account when trying to meet the requirements of Hamilton's rule. This rule can therefore be summarised as an equation: C is less than RB when the conditions are met and the allele spreads. Thus, kin selection holds that under certain circumstances, selfless behaviour might spread through a population if it provides a big enough fitness benefit to address the costs of that behaviour to the organism. This is wryly summed up by the biologist J.B.S. Haldane in his alleged quip that putting his life on the line by jumping into a river to save someone would be worth it to save 2 brothers or 8 cousins, but not if there were only 1 brother or 7 cousins. Haldane would go on to argue for the ability of altruistic genes to proliferate if family members experienced a benefit in his 1932 book, Causes of Evolution. As I said at the beginning of today's episode, this episode is meant as a first introduction to what kin selection actually is. Given the divide in the field I mentioned above, it's probably best to leave any further exploration of the topic as a story for another time. With that, until next time, thank you all for listening. Feel free to get in touch at the show's email address for any questions, comments, or topic suggestions for future episodes. And until next time, have a great week, everyone.